One cut entered the wood, and the whole island seemed to listen. Lucian Billiot drove the saw into the cypress while wet wind salted his lips and the trunk groaned like a living chest. Behind him, old Delphine Someni shouted for him to stop. He did not turn. If he stopped now, the tree would pin the blade, and every man watching would see his hands shake. The chapel bell had hung for years from a crooked shrimp trawl frame, ugly as scrap and weak in hard weather. Father Benoit wanted a proper stand before Ash Sunday. Lucian, who built boats that could nose through reed-choked water in the dark, had promised one. He had chosen the tallest cypress left on the island's ridge, where roots gripped the highest ground. Delphine reached him as the cut widened. Her black skirt dragged through oyster shell and mud. She struck the trunk with her palm and stared at him as if he had raised a knife over kin. "That one keeps names," she said. Lucian spat sawdust from his mouth. "It keeps termites and birds. The chapel needs wood. It keeps names," she repeated, slower this time, as if she were speaking to a child near deep water. Around them, the other islanders shifted in silence. Some crossed their arms. Some looked down toward the marsh where thin water flashed between reeds. Lucien's daughter, Marie, stood beside the mule cart with a wrapped bundle in her lap. She was 11, with her mother's steady eyes. She had carved a bell clapper from river birch, small hands working after supper for 6 nights. She wanted to hear her own work ring on Ash Sunday. Lucian pulled the saw free and drove it in again. The scent of fresh cypress rose sharp and clean. The great trunk shuddered. By the time the tree leaned and the first warning cries went up, the choice had already left his hands. When the tree hit the ground, the cypress fell across the ridge with a crack that rolled over the marsh. Egrets burst from the reeds. Marie flinched and clutched her bundle to her chest. Delphine stepped back as if the earth itself had shoved her. The bell gave one thin cry before the water took the frame. Lucian set his boot on the trunk, breathing hard. Men moved in with axes and rope. No one praised the cut. They worked because work was there, and because the chapel still needed a frame. By evening, the bell stand rose beside the small white church. Lucian fitted the beams with clean joints and pegged them tight. The wood shone honey gold where the bark had been stripped. Father Benoit thanked him in a low voice, but his eyes kept drifting toward Delphine, who sat under the church oak shelling shrimp without looking up. Marie brought her carved clapper at dusk. She unwrapped it from a flour sack. The birch had been smoothed with fish oil until it held a soft glow. She had carved a ring of tiny herons around the neck, each bird no longer than Lucien's thumb. "Hang it, Papa," he took it from her with care. The wood felt warm from her lap. For the first time that day, his chest loosened. On Ash Wednesday Eve, the island women swept the chapel floor with palm brooms. Men raked the yard and reset the shell path. Children ran under the bell frame until their mothers called them back. It was a plain custom, nothing grand. The bell called people to prayer and marked burials, storms, and the first catch feast after Lent. Still, each hand moved with quiet care, because a small church on a thin strip of land could hold a whole people together. That night, Lucian woke to the scrape of branches on his roof. The air pressed hot and wrong against the walls. He stepped outside and smelled the gulf before he heard it, deep and heavy, like wet iron. At dawn, the sky had gone the color of lead. Father Benoit drove house to house and told families to tie what they could and move elders inland to the school building, which stood on blocks a little higher than the rest. Lucian lashed his skiff to a post, then doubled the line. He carried sacks of rice and blankets through rising water while Marie held the chicken crate above her knees. By noon, the road had vanished. Water shoved under doors and slapped at porch steps. Wind bent the reeds flat. Lucian saw the chapel bell frame sway once, then hold. He felt a fierce flash of pride. It died before sunset. A wall of surge came from the south and crossed the island like a hand wiping crumbs from a table. It lifted pirogues into fences. It struck the chapel broadside. Lucian heard the bell ring one wild note, high and thin, before the frame split. The beam he had shaped with such care spun away in gray water. "Marie," he shouted. She was on the school porch with her mother, Estelle, both soaked to the bone. Marie pointed toward the chapel yard. Her carved clapper, tied in place that morning, had broken free and vanished into the flood. All night the storm dragged at the island. In the dark, cattle bawled from somewhere out in the water. A child cried until sleep took him. Delphine sat by the window with her rosary wrapped around one wrist and said the names of the dead under her breath, as if she were counting posts in a sinking fence. When daylight came, 3 homes had slid from their blocks. 2 family graves had opened near the old oak. The shell road was gouged into channels. Lucian walked the wreckage with mud to his calves and felt faces turn toward him, then away. No one said the words at first. They did not need to. He had cut the tree that kept names. The names people spoke in low voices. After the storm, the island changed faster than speech could keep up. 1 month, a patch of grass held. Next month, open water licked at it. Shrimp moved in strange patterns. Crab traps came up empty where fathers had once filled them by noon. The old men still mended nets under shade, but each season there was less shade, less ground, less reason to trust the calendar. On the table lay forms and maps, and each paper asked for more than a signature. Lucian rebuilt skiffs, patched roofs, and set new porch steps for widows who could not pay. He worked hard enough to split his palms. It did not clear his name. People thanked him because island people did not forget manners, yet blame sat behind their teeth. Children heard more than adults guessed. Once, at the landing, Lucian found 2 boys arguing over a broken oar. One jabbed his finger toward the marsh and shouted, "Go ask the tree cutter to fix it. He fixes things after they sink." Lucian kept walking, though the words struck like shot. Marie grew quiet. She still followed him to the shed, but she no longer asked to shape pegs or smooth planks. When Ash Wednesday came each year, Father Benoit borrowed a brass handbell from another parish. Its sound was thin, city-made, wrong for the island. Marie stood outside the chapel and listened without moving. One evening, Delphine came to Lucien's shed carrying a sack of dried sage and button thread. The old woman's hands had knotted with age, yet she still tied better crab line than boys half her age. Lucian nearly sent her away. Instead, he cleared a seat on an overturned skiff. She laid the sage on the bench. "For mosquitoes," she said. He nodded. After a while she spoke again. "You think I blamed one tree for all this? You told everyone it kept names. I told them it held memory. That is not the same as blame." Lucian sanded a gunnel edge until the dust turned his thumb yellow. The water was coming anyway. Delphine looked through the open door toward the marsh. "Yes, but pride can make a wound wider." He wanted to answer sharply. Instead he heard Marie laughing outside with Estelle, the sound smaller than it had once been. He set the sandpaper down. Delphine pulled a cord from her pocket. A little shell hung on it, drilled clean through. "My mother tied these over cradle boards when storms gathered. Not to command the water. To steady a frightened hand." She wrapped the cord around the bench post. "People keep customs because the body needs work when the heart has none." Lucian said nothing. That year, state men came in pressed shirts and clean boots. They brought maps, clipboards, and words like grant, relocation, and risk. Families gathered in the community hall with folding fans and paper cups of coffee. Some listened with fixed faces. Some stared at the floorboards. One woman stepped outside and wept beside the diesel tank where no one would trouble her. Moving from the island was not one decision. It was 100 cuts made across a table under fluorescent light. Which house first? Which elder needed a place near the clinic? Which graves could be protected? Which could not? People signed forms with hands that had held cast nets, children, oyster knives, hymn books. Lucian sat in the back and watched Marie, now grown, her hair tied with a red ribbon. She copied down dates for her grandmother because Delphine's eyes had dimmed. Each time a paper slid toward them, Marie pressed her lips tight before writing. That was the second bridge no one named aloud. A people can know a road is needed and still feel the knife when it opens. When the meeting ended, Marie waited for him by the door. "I want to go out tomorrow," she said. "In the skiff, to the drowned ridge." He looked at her, then at the black water beyond the hall windows. "For what, my clapper?" she said. "Or the place where it went." Through the broken reeds, they left before dawn in Lucien's old skiff, the same one he had tied down on the night of the storm. Its paint had worn to patches of dull green and bare wood. The motor coughed twice, then caught. Cold spray touched their faces as they slid away from the landing. Out of mud and reeds, the small carved piece returned first. The island did not end in a clean line anymore. Water fingered through what had once been yards and gardens. Fence posts rose from the marsh like rotten teeth. Lucian steered by memory. A bent oak snag, a line of half-dead cane, the place where old Mrs. Naquin's porch had stood before a king tide carried it off. Marie sat in the bow with a push-pull across her knees. She was a teacher now on the mainland school route, yet in the skiff she returned to the child who knew currents by color. Neither spoke for the first mile. Fog lay low over the ponds. It smelled of salt, mud, and crushed reed. Once, a mullet broke the surface and slapped back down. The sound made Lucian think of a hammer striking peg heads in his shed. At the drowned ridge he cut the motor. Water spread smooth and dark around them. Here, years before, cypress roots had held a rise of ground where children hunted lizards and old women set chairs after supper. Now only the tops of stumps showed when the tide ran low. Marie pointed. There. He saw it then. A branch tangle snagged against a half-sunk trunk, wrapped in old wire and marsh grass. Storms had built and rebuilt the heap over seasons. Something pale caught in it and flashed. Lucian shipped the pole into the mud and drew the skiff close. The water smelled sour where the bottom had been stirred. He leaned over, arm deep to the elbow, and felt roots, wire, shell, then smooth wood. When he lifted his hand, the birch clapper came free in a curtain of black water. Marie made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The herons were still there, though one beak had chipped away. The wood had darkened with age, but it held. Lucian wiped mud from it with his sleeve. His throat closed. He had spent years thinking the island wanted from him some grand act, some giant payment equal to the tree he had cut. Instead he held a child's carving no longer than his forearm. At the bottom of the tangle, his fingers found more. Not treasure, not magic, small things the island had kept when people could not. A rusted spoon, a blue glass bead, a brass hinge, a prayer medal green with age. Each piece came up with weed and silt, each one ordinary, each one enough to stop the breath for a beat. Houses had gone, roads had gone, still the water had not erased everything. Marie touched the old medal and looked at him. Delphine used to say memory needs hands. Lucian nodded. He could not speak. They worked until noon, laying each found object in a fish crate lined with feed sacks. The sun burned through fog and turned the water white. Sweat ran under Lucian's hat brim. His shoulders ached. He welcomed the ache. On the ride back, Marie held the clapper wrapped in her jacket. The tribe wants a farewell gathering before the next move, she said. At the chapel yard, Lucian kept his eyes on the channel. I know. They want a bell again. He gripped the tiller. The motor droned. Marsh hens clicked in the reeds. I can build a frame, he said. Marie studied him with that same steady look she had worn as a child. Not from Cyprus. No. He tasted salt at the corner of his mouth. Not from Cyprus. The choice settled between them, plain and hard. He would build with salvaged oak from the ruined fish house and iron braces from his own shed. The new frame would not pretend to replace what had stood before. It would carry the weight that remained. When they reached the landing, Delphine was there with a cane in one hand and a grocery sack in the other. Age had bent her, but her eyes were sharp. Marie opened the jacket and showed her the clapper. For a long moment Delphine only looked. Then she pressed her fingers to the carved herons and smiled without showing teeth. Good, she said. Now ring the people home once more, so they can leave with their names still in their mouths. The last ring before the road word spread fast across the island. By Saturday afternoon, people came carrying folding chairs, gumbo pots, hymn sheets, and bundles tied in old pillowcases. Some had already moved into new houses north of the water. Some still slept on the island 3 nights a week because their bodies did not trust walls that did not smell of brine. Children chased one another between trucks while elders claimed the shade first, as elders should. The bell crossed water and yard alike, gathering the living around what remained. Lucian had set the new bell frame in the chapel yard before sunrise. Salvaged oak gave it a darker grain than cypress. Iron straps, cleaned and blackened, crossed the joints. It looked plain, steady, and honest. He had shaped no flourishes. He had no wish to impress anyone. Father Benoit blessed the frame in a brief prayer. Delphine stood beside him in a blue shawl despite the heat. Marie brought the clapper wrapped again in cloth. When she handed it to Lucian, the yard fell quiet enough to hear the flies at the gumbo table. He tied the clapper in place with new cord. His fingers remembered the first time and faltered. Then he turned to the people. I cut what I should not have cut, he said. No wind moved. Somewhere near the road, a child dropped a spoon. I told myself wood was wood. I told myself a strong hand could replace anything. Since then, the water has taken its share, and more. Some of that would have come no matter what I did. But pride made me deaf, and deafness has a cost. He looked at Delphine. You spoke, and I did not hear you. The old woman's chin lifted once. Lucian turned toward the rows of families, toward cousins and neighbors and men who had once fished beside him in black water before dawn. I cannot give back the ridge. I cannot set every grave right. I cannot stop the gulf. But I can put my hands where they belong. He rested his palm on the oak beam. This frame is not payment. It is work. If any family wants help moving boards, steps, sheds, crosses, I will come. Still no one spoke. Lucian felt the old urge to defend himself, to explain tides and canals and years of loss. He let the urge pass. Marie stepped forward first. Ring it, Papa. He drew the bell back and released it. The sound spread over the yard, low and full. It did not sing like brass from town. It carried a rougher note, shaped by weather and oak and the hand-carved birch striking true. The bell rolled across the marsh, over sinking lots and broken docks, over the places where porches had stood and children had learned to cast lines. People bowed their heads. Some wept without hiding it. One old shrimper removed his cap and held it against his chest. A small boy, too young to know the years behind the moment, stared wide-eyed as if the sound itself were a boat coming through fog. Then the names began. Father Benoit spoke a prayer for those who had died. After him, Delphine named families who had lived on the island before the road, before engines, before maps from Baton Rouge. Others followed. Billiot, Dardar, Naquin, Chasen, Samani. The names passed from mouth to mouth, warm and human, each one landing like a post driven into soft ground. That was how leave-taking happened there. Not with speeches polished for strangers. With food, weathered hands, and the stubborn act of naming what the water had not earned. By sunset, trucks were loaded. Chair legs sank into damp soil as people folded them away. Gumbo pots emptied. Children slept against their mothers' shoulders. Lucian stayed by the bell frame while shadows lengthened over the shell path. Marie came beside him. Will you come up with us tomorrow? She asked. He looked toward the darkening marsh where the drowned ridge lay beyond sight. Tomorrow, he said. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, as she had when she was small and sleepy after Mass. He covered her fingers with his work-worn hand. When the last truck pulled onto the road, Lucian rang the bell once more. This time the sound did not ask the island to stay. It marked the leaving.